Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen Jin. I am a current master's student here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in the Human Development and Education program.
And I am Justin Shaw. I'm a master's student in the Educational Leadership, Organizations, and Entrepreneurship program. We would like to welcome everyone joining both in person and in the Elliott Lyman Conference Room and online. It was a short, constructive conversation about Dr. Sandel's book, What is Justice? What's the Right Thing to Do, that first connected us. From our brief exchange, it quickly grew into deeper reflection and dialogue.
That conversation ultimately became the starting point of the Social Justice Club here at the HGSE. A student-led organization that is politically neutral and committed to fostering a welcoming community dedicated to advancing social justice in education. And I've been honored to serve as the president.
And I'm honored to serve as the vice president. We're deeply grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with the Askwith Education Forum on today's event.
This collaboration reflects a shared commitment, a thoughtful engagement, and inclusive conversation, and we are honored to bring our perspectives and energy to this forum. My social views were shaped during my middle school years in China. A close friend of mine from a marginalized background like my own was involved in a conflict with the son of the wealthy and influential family. Shortly afterward, my friend who showed the academic promise was transferred to a vocational school. Even as a child, I understood how unequal the outcome was. Not long after, my family immigrated to the United States and settled in what was considered a good town. With access to supportive teachers and resources, my family thought that I was able to reach their American dream, until I encountered the tendency of higher expectations of Asian Americans than some of their peers in the college admission process. Around the same time, I learned that the son of the wealthy family was attending China's most prestigious university through what Professor Sandel later calls the side door. When The Tyranny of Merit was published years later, I realized that these experiences were not confined to one society. Across continents, the same patterns repeated themselves. They continue to raise questions for me. In a world shaped by unequal starting points, how should we define fairness, success, and responsibility? And what do we owe one another?
My introduction to Dr. Sandel's work began my first year of teaching. A seventh grade student was suddenly removed from my roles by school officials and sent to an alternative school that other teachers problematically called a dropout factory. Other students had committed similar infractions and received second chances. The difference to me, it seemed, was one of advocacy. They had well-resourced parents that could reach out, press, email, while this student had a mother that worked two different jobs. While I had grown up experiencing inequities, being in a position of responsibility and care made it feel like I was failing this student and millions of others like him. Now, after 8 years of teaching, I have seen that our schools can fail some of our students. And soon after this incident, The Tyranny of Merit was articulating many of the injustices that I had struggled to name.
Dr. Sandel's work did more than just give us ideas. It gave us a shared language for the questions we care about, and it ultimately brought us closer as collaborators and friends.
Tonight's Askwith Forum will be led by Dean Noni Lasso. Dr. Lasso is the Roy E. Larson Professor of Education and Human Development and is the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
It is now our great honor to introduce Dean Noni Lasso, whose leadership continues to strengthen HGSE's commitment to dialogues across differences and meaningful public engagement. Please join us in welcoming Dean Lasso.
Thank you, Helen and Justin, for that terrific introduction, and thanks for all you do with the Social Justice Club and by extension, our HGSE community. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you all here and online to our first Askwith Forum of 2026 with Michael Sandel from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Before I introduce Michael, just a few words about the Askwith Education Forum series. This is an endowed lecture series that is designed to bring leading thinkers and scholars to the Harvard Graduate School of Education for deep conversation with the community on the highest priority issues in education. And it is part of our larger effort to fulfill the mission of the school, which is to prepare educators and conduct research that will expand opportunities and improve outcomes for learners around the world. We have a few elements to this afternoon's event. After I introduce Michael, he will give a presentation. Then I will pose a few questions to him before opening it up to questions from the audience. I also know that Michael is willing to sign books after the event, so we are grateful to him for his time and engagement. I'm also very pleased to say that after this event concludes formally, we will hold what is our first Dialogue Across Differences debrief. This is a small, intimate discussion among about a dozen HGSE students designed to help participants engage more deeply with the ideas raised during this forum, and in so doing to continue to cultivate listening skills, engage their differences, and in doing so with candor and respect, navigating the complexity that defines so much of the work and leadership in education today. If you are an ed school student and that sounds appealing, you'd like to be part of a Dialogue Across Differences debrief in the future, please be in touch with OSA and check the newsletter. We will continue with this practice. Okay, Michael. To begin with, perhaps the best thing to know about Michael Sandel is he is the rare public intellectual who has fans from all academic disciplines and on both sides of the political aisle. As the liberal columnist E.J. Dionne once wrote, Michael will, quote, force you to rethink your assumptions and challenge you to question accepted ways of thinking, quote. The liberal British publication, The New Statesman, called Michael the indispensable voice of reason. On the other hand, as student body president of Palisades High School, Michael convinced then governor of California, Ronald Reagan, to visit and speak at his school and debate Michael. We might hear more on that tonight. Decades later, the conservative columnist George Will wrote, Michael Sandel is a liberal, but not the annoying sort. High praise indeed. Michael is a political philosopher who isn't afraid to ask hard questions about anything, our education system included, which makes him a perfect speaker for the Askwith Education Forum, because at the heart of the education enterprise is the following: to seek truth even when there is disagreement, to evaluate and analyze both established dogma and new ideas, and to raise questions that might be both uncomfortable and important. It's also at the heart of a thriving democracy. We can all do a better job listening generously to one another, such that we can get to a place where differences are a source of growth and progress, not division and stalemate. To be clear, this is not a directive that is just specific to education, but to society as a whole. And in that sense, Michael is in many ways uniquely positioned to continue to spark progress. I alluded to this earlier, but it's really true that Michael Sandel is as close to a Harvard celebrity as they come. He has rightly been described as both a rock star moralist by Newsweek and the world's most influential living philosopher by the New Statesman. Here at Harvard, he is the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government, where he has taught for 40 years. Harvard undergrads know that Michael's foundational and influential course, Justice, is on the must-take list, since it's been one of the most popular courses at Harvard since its inception. Nearly 1,000 students enroll each year. Dozens of graduate students run dozens of sections on the order of 65, with many scheduled in the early evening at first-year dorms and in various Harvard houses. Outside of our packed Askwith Hall, Michael has delivered lectures to packed houses at St. Paul's Cathedral, the Sydney Opera House, and the Delacorte Theater in New York Central Park, just to name a few. And thanks to online platforms like edX and YouTube, as well as public television broadcasts in the US, Japan, and the UK, literally millions of people around the world have taken justice as well. Michael is also a prolific author whose books have received widespread acclaim. His book, What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets, was shortlisted for the Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year. His book, Justice: What's the Right Thing to Do, was a New York Times bestseller. More recently, The Tyranny of Merit and his co-authored book, Equality: What It Means and Why It Matters, have raised some critical and fascinating ideas about the relationship between meritocracy, education, and democracy. He is the winner of the Berggruen Prize for Philosophy and Culture, which is sometimes described of as the Nobel for Philosophy, awarded for his lifetime work on justice, ethics, markets, and democracy. He is winner of the Princess of Asturias Award for Social Sciences, which is Spain's leading humanities and social sciences prize. Michael is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and, unsurprisingly, a winner of the Harvard-Radcliffe Phi Beta Kappa Teaching for Excellence in Undergrad Teaching at Harvard. Michael, we are thrilled to have you here this evening and to consider you as a partner in this difficult and complex march toward educational progress. Please join me in welcoming Michael Sandel.
Wow, I'm overwhelmed. What a warm introduction. Thank you, Noni, and thank you, Helen and Justin, for instigating this and for those warm words of welcome. This evening, we're going to have a discussion about meritocracy and education and democracy. Our conversation comes at a time when our civic life isn't going very well. And my suggestion tonight is that it has something to do, the deep polarization has something to do with what seems an attractive ideal, the principle of meritocracy. As Noni pointed out, I write of the tyranny of merit, which raises the question, how can merit become a kind of tyranny? We normally think of merit as a good thing. If I need surgery, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. That's merit. So how could merit turn tyrannical or oppressive? To think this through, we need to look back over the past 5 decades. The divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, setting us apart. This has partly to do with the widening inequalities of income and wealth in recent decades. But it's not only that, it has also to do with the changing attitudes toward success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the bounty the market bestows upon them, and by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate too. Now, this way of thinking about success arises from that seemingly attractive ideal, the principle of meritocracy, the principle that says, insofar as chances are equal, the winners deserve their winnings. Now, we all know that in practice, chances are not truly equal. Children born to poor families tend to stay poor as adults. It's not that easy to rise one generation from the next, especially from a low-income family to an affluent one. There are some countries where it's easier than in ours, despite what we tell ourselves about the promise of upward mobility, right at the heart of the American dream. A study was done asking how many generations it would take at current levels of intergenerational mobility. How many generations would it take for someone born poor, bottom 10%, to rise not to the top, but to the median income in their society? In Denmark, it takes, what would you guess? 2 generations. What about in the US? What do you think? Call out a number. 10, 3, 5, 7, 5. It takes 5. Now, if the lack of social mobility is the problem, if people don't really start at an equal starting point, we might be inclined to think that the solution would simply be to create a more perfect meritocracy, one with genuine, fair equality of opportunity. A truly fair meritocracy where everyone starts at the same starting line, but more than that, to be really fair, the start would have to be one where everyone came to the starting line with the same advantages before they arrived, before the race began, where everyone had access, for example, to the same good running coaches, to the best running shoes, to the best, healthiest diet, training, workout facilities. Then we could say, if there were truly fair equality of opportunity, then could we say, I'll put it as a question, then would you say that the winners of that kind of fair race deserve the winnings? A perfect meritocracy. Let's take that as our first question and just see by a show of hands what people think. If we could bring everyone up to a truly fair starting point, how many would say that the winner of that race could be said to deserve his or her winnings? How many would say yes? Then we could say that people. How many say no? All right, let's see again, those who say yes. A truly fair. Okay, now it's kind of even as far as I can see, though not everybody voted. Let's hear, and we have people with microphones on each aisle. I hope if you want to come here. Let's hear first from someone who thinks that even then, it could not be said that the winners deserve their winnings. Why not? If the race is truly fair, who will begin our discussion? Yes, stand up and tell us your name, and we'll get you a microphone.
Hi, I'm Gregorio from the Kennedy School.
Mm-hmm.
What if I were born with a better heart or lungs or some type of biological talent or capacity?
Right, heart or lungs, and for that matter, longer legs or just fleetness of foot, like Usain Bolt, the fastest runner in the world. So even if I had the same good running shoes as Usain Bolt and the same coach and the same training facilities.
Yeah, he has things I don't have.
Yeah.
That are not his own doing. Like, what did Usain Bolt did to get born with those? long legs.
Right. And so those are just what? Talents and gifts that are not his doing. Is that what you're suggesting? And so I'm going to lose to him every time. Even if I work as hard, you think?
Yeah.
Suppose I train even harder than he does. You still
Why?
don't think I will?
Yeah. Will be hard. I would ask myself, how can I train harder than him?
Okay.
Like,
well, you could work harder, but you still might not run faster.
Yeah.
That's your point.
Or I could work harder because I have better means. I have more extra time.
Okay, but better means that we corrected for, suppose, in this hypothetical. All right, so Gregoire has pointed out that even if we had fair background conditions, or more broadly speaking, fair equality of opportunity, educational opportunity, training, preparation, cultural advantages growing up, health, nutrition, housing, all the rest, that some people are just more talented or gifted than others, and that's a matter of luck, not moral desert. Do I have it right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that, Gregoire. Let's see now if there is someone who disagrees with what Gregoire has suggested, and those of you who said it would be deserved if the race were truly fair. The winners would deserve their winnings. Who has a reply to Gregoire? What would be your answer to his argument? Yes, please. And if you could stand up, if you can, and tell us.
Hello, Professor. I'm Madiha. I'm from Graduate School of Education.
Madina?
Madiha.
Madiha, yeah.
And I'm studying education policy and analysis. And one lens that I'm trying to build is that there are things which are in my control and there are things which are not in my control.
Right.
At systems level. I cannot control if I am born with longer legs or shorter legs.
Right.
But what I can control is to give equal access to students, good health, better education, and holistic support system. So my brain would focus on what support I can give within my area of control. So that's the reason I disagree with him, that those are the things I cannot control unless, of course, scientists build a way we could change the gene and all create Steve Jobs or Usain Bolts, then that's a different thing.
Genetic engineering.
Exactly. Unless and until we do that.
For the sake of equality.
For the sake of equality.
I know. Would you be tempted by that? Would you favor that?
I would not.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't.
So you don't want, does that mean you don't really want to make the race perfectly fair?
But then the world keeps on changing. Even if we do that, even if we magically create all equal kinds of babies with blue eyes, 6 feet height, and long, beautiful black hair, even then there is no guarantee that they would survive if there is something new that's happening. For example, we had coronavirus. Nobody predicted it.
Okay, so, but on the point, Madiha, on the point that luck, the luck of being talented or having long legs, undermines deservingness. You say that we should just focus on the things that are not a matter of luck, not beyond our control.
Absolutely. We should focus on things we can control as a community, as a society, at systems level.
And once we do that, then we say the winners deserve the winnings?
Absolutely.
Okay. Who has a reply? What would you say? We'll get you a microphone. And tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Renata. I'm from Mexico, from HKS, Kennedy School.
Yeah.
So my reply will be that it's not only about the qualities that you have by chance, by luck, but also about the context. So maybe you have an ability that is very valuable in the context that you are in that moment. So that gives you an advantage.
I see.
But maybe, so if we modify everyone genetically to be equal, we will not be, maybe we will all be at the same advantage in this context, but maybe something changed in the context and now we are all in a very bad disadvantage. So I think the situation is that it's not only about what you have, but also about the context where you are born.
And by the context, what you mean is what's valued in the society where you happen to live.
What's value, what's needed, and
What's
what's value,
need-
what's needed. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Renata?
Renata, yes.
Renata. So Renata is pointing, so you voted against the idea. You said even a perfect meritocracy would not be one where the winners deserve their winnings because, tell me if I've got it right, whereas Gregoire emphasized the luck involved in having this or that talent, you're arguing, you're making, directing our attention to the luck involved, beyond my control, of living in a society that happens to value the talents I happen to have.
Correctly.
Okay, so thank you for that. I want to thank our three, those who have gotten our discussion going. Gregorio Madeja, as it is, and Renata. Let's thank them for getting this discussion going. Because what this discussion has brought out are two objections to the idea that even with perfectly fair equality of opportunity, the winners deserve their winnings. Two objections, both having to do with luck and contingency beyond the doing of the person who prevails. One element of luck is having this or that talent to be a fast runner, let's say, in the example we were using. The other contingency has to do with living in a society and at a time when the qualities I have in abundance are prized, needed, wanted. So, for example, let's think of someone who's very successful. No, before we think of someone who's monetarily successful, let's first think of your best, most inspiring teacher in high school. Since we're here at the School of Ed, let's celebrate teachers just for a moment. So, can you think of your best teacher in high school? And I imagine you can remember their name. I can remember the name of my most inspiring high school teacher, Miss O'Brien. She was very tough, very conservative. She taught AP US history. And she was intimidating, sort of, but a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Anyhow, you can think of yours. And how much did that teacher get paid? About? Just call it out. What do you guess? How much? 20,000. 20,000? It was maybe a while ago in a... yeah, I was a high school student a while ago. That's true. All right. So maybe it would be a bit higher now. What would others get? What would you say? 60. Maybe 60, 70, 80,000. What would it be? Yeah, 70,000. Now think of someone who makes a lot of money, more than 70,000. 1,000 times as much, 2,000 times as much, 5,000 times as much. Who might that be? How much does Taylor Swift make per concert? I think it's about 14 million per concert. And I don't know how much in a year. What is it? When she was on tour, it was something close to $1 billion a year, something. I don't know exactly. But let's safely say it was 5,000, at least 5,000 times more than your best high school teacher or my Miss O'Brien. Now, how many would say that Taylor Swift deserves to make 5,000 or 8,000 times more than our best teachers? How many would say so? Now, we'll take a poll. Even in the Harvard School of Education, some brave souls raised their hands just now. But only about 15 people did in this whole, maybe 20. How many don't think so? Most people don't think so. Now, thinking back to the principles that came out in our earlier discussion, I can imagine two reasons why the majority just now put up their hands. You might think that Taylor Swift, or to take a star athlete who makes also 5,000 or 4,000 times more than your teacher, LeBron James or Steph Curry, you might think, well, they're gifted musically or athletically, gifted in ways, despite their cultivation and hard work, gifted in ways not wholly their own doing. They're lucky. That's back to the first objection. And some of you who object or who don't think they morally deserve that much more than the teacher might say, they're lucky to live at a time when people love the kind of pop music that Taylor Swift performs. Or when LeBron and Steph Curry are lucky to live at a time when people love basketball and reward it handsomely. If LeBron had lived back in the days of the Italian Renaissance, he would have been just as gifted athletically, but he wouldn't have made as much because people didn't care much about basketball back then. They cared more about fresco painters. So here are two contingencies that arguably undermine the idea of deservingness with respect to these various contributions. But there is a further objection to meritocracy that speaks most directly to our current political condition. Beyond the question of luck and contingency, of talents and their valuation, is an objection or a problem with meritocracy that is not about distributive justice. It's not about fairness. It's about a flaw in the ideal having to do with the fact that meritocracy, even a perfectly realized one, is corrosive of the common good. It's corrosive of the common good because it leads the successful to inhale too deeply of their own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way, to forget their indebtedness to those who make their achievements possible. And it leads them to look down on those less successful than themselves. Why? Because the more perfect the meritocracy, the greater the tendency to assume that those who land on top have earned it fair and square, and that those who land on the bottom deserve their fate too. This was the objection to meritocracy first articulated by the person who coined the term. Michael Young was a British sociologist affiliated with the Labour Party in Britain. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Meritocracy in the late 1950s. And although meritocracy soon became the name for an ideal, an aspiration by politicians and editorial writers and the general public, when Michael Young coined the term, he was not describing an aspiration, but a dystopian fear. And the fear was, he was writing, remember, in the aftermath of the Second World War. And in Britain, a class-based society, for the first time, the children of the working class were beginning to win admission to good schools, and beginning to be eligible for good jobs. That was a good thing, Michael Young thought. But he saw that as equality of opportunity became perfected, the winners would come to consider that they had earned their place. Because after all, in an aristocratic feudal society, there were those on top and those on the bottom. But those on the top knew they were there due to the accident of birth, and those on the bottom likewise. But that would no longer be true in a meritocratic society, Michael Young pointed out, and he even went so far as to predict that eventually, as the meritocracy tightened its hold on social life, there would be a populist revolt overturning the meritocratic elite. In the year, he said, 2034, he made that bold prediction. His prediction came true 18 years ahead of schedule. Because what we've seen unfold in recent years is a sense of anger, resentment by a great many working people who feel that not only are they struggling economically in the aftermath of 5 decades of globalization and stagnant wages for median workers in real terms, and the outsourcing of jobs and the hollowing out of once flourishing industrial communities. Not only that, but a great many working people had come to feel that the credentialed elites who landed on top look down on them, don't respect the dignity of the work they do or their contributions to the common good. Here's what deepened that sense of resentment. Those who presided over the version of globalization that played itself out over the past 4 or 5 decades, those who embraced the market faith that underlay the version of globalization, they noticed the rising inequality of income and wealth, but they offered working people the following advice. If you want to compete and win in the global economy, they said, go to college. What you earn will depend on what you learn. You can make it if you try. I call this the rhetoric of rising. It became so familiar across the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, familiar to the point almost of mantra, of incantation, the rhetoric of rising. But what these elites missed was the insult implicit in that advice. The insult was this: if you're struggling in the new economy and you didn't get a college degree, your failure must be your fault. You didn't do what we said you should do if you wanted to flourish. There was something self-serving in the bracing advice they were offering because it deflected from the policymakers' responsibility for the condition of those left behind to those individuals themselves who hadn't improved themselves. And the mistake was to assume that the answer, the solution to the widening inequalities of income and wealth was individual upward mobility through higher education. So it's no wonder that many working people turned against credentialed professional elites and were open to, and in some cases supportive of, attacks on universities by those whose politics tapped into their sense of grievance. Because, and this brings us directly to education, in this case, higher education. colleges and universities were conscripted into a special role in this meritocratic system because it's higher education that confers the credentials and defines the merits that a market-driven meritocratic society honors and rewards. This conferred on higher education enormous importance, cultural and political and economic importance and prestige. But it came at a steep cost. Part of that cost was in making higher education a likely, plausible target of the anger and resentment, the backlash against the tyranny of merit, a sense of elites looking down. But it exacted another price, independent of the anger and resentment of those who didn't win admission. And it's important to recognize, those of us who spend our days in the company of the credentialed can easily forget the simple fact that most of our fellow citizens don't have a four-year college degree of any kind, from a selective or non-selective, public or private college or university. About 62% do not. So it was folly to create an economy that set as a necessary condition on dignified work and a decent life a four-year degree that most people don't have. So part of the cost, the moral cost to higher education of their presiding role in this arrangement, our presiding role, was to become a target, to make ourselves ready targets of the backlash, of the anger, of the resentment. But not only that, we allowed ourselves, in fulfilling this role, this meritocratic mission, to become sorting machines for a market-driven meritocratic society. And gradually, eventually, our sorting function, our networking function, our credentializing function began to crowd out our educational mission and purpose, the intrinsic goods, our intrinsic reasons for being, which is to cultivate research, but especially teaching and the love of learning for their own sake. Now, we can see how this played out by just bringing to mind the effect of becoming sorting machines on our students. Because the damaging toll that this arrangement exacted was not just on those who didn't get in. It also made itself felt on the winners, those who did. Because unlike the old aristocratic hereditary elite, the new meritocratic elite wins its place through strenuous striving, the competition, the fierce competition to get in. And a number of critics have pointed out that there is a kind of hereditary aspect to getting in, having to do with the advantages growing up that enable people to score well on the SAT and to do well in high school and to go off and do interesting internships and perform good works abroad and so on. But the point of it is, and the reason for the strenuous striving, is that the transition of privilege, of meritocratic privilege, is not guaranteed. It depends on getting in. So collectively, it looks like the results are almost preordained because there are very few young people from the bottom 20% who even win admission to colleges and universities. But to those in the midst of the hyper-competitive struggle to win admission, it's impossible to view success as anything other than the result of individual effort and striving and achievement. And I see this in my students. Over the years, people ask sometimes, have their political views changed over the years? Not really. But what I have noticed, and part of what prompted me to write the book, was the conviction, the meritocratic conviction among young people that they're landing in the first year class of a selective college or university is the result of their hard work and effort. That has deepened its hold. And it's easy to understand why. Because after prevailing in a stress-strewn, anxious, meritocratic tournament, a gauntlet that has come to define not only the high school years, but adolescent years in general among those whose families are trying to help them win admission, it's almost impossible to emerge from that without believing I'm here because I worked so hard in high school and before. In fact, here's one small telling bit of evidence for this. The word parent only became a verb in the 1970s. Think about that. I mean, parent used to be a noun, but to parent or to hyper-parent, it's almost a redundancy, at least in that group. So it coincides, this meritocratic tournament, and the stress and the anxiety and the emotional and mental health toll it takes. It really is a product of these same decades of the widening gap between winners and losers, and the increase in the stakes of getting in. Now, what should we do about it? We should try to change this arrangement. We should try to restore higher education to the intrinsic goods that give us our reason for being. And I have some suggestions in the book, including for highly competitive places with applicants from tens of thousands of people, most of whom are perfectly well qualified. I have a suggestion, we can talk about it if you want to, of admission by a lottery among those who are qualified. Winnow out those who wouldn't flourish and have a lottery among the rest. But that's just one small step. I think we need to rethink the role of higher education in allocating opportunity and also social recognition and esteem more broadly in our social and public life. We need to focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on the dignity of work, on asking how to make life better and more secure for everyone who contributes to the economy and the common good, whether or not they have a university degree. And we've seen some examples in states around the country, red states and blue states, of removing a college degree as a requirement for state jobs, including jobs for which skills do not require a 4-year degree. I mean, some of those who've been involved in this movement have pointed out that there are jobs that have nothing to do with what goes on in college that insist on a BA as a qualification, including, in one case was pointed out, the job of being the driver of the Oscar Mayer Wiener mobile advertising thing. You know, it's in the shape of a hot dog, and it promotes Oscar Mayer Wieners. If you want to apply for the job, I think it pays $37,000 a year to drive that thing. You need a college degree. Why? But large percentage of jobs in state government, and for that matter in industry, something similar can be said. But we can talk about other possible solutions in the discussion or responses. But I would end with a broader shift that I think we need to make. At the level of the public philosophy or governing ethic, it's often thought that the only alternative to equality of opportunity is a sterile, oppressive equality of results, where everyone must have the same income and wealth. But that isn't the only alternative. Another alternative might be described as a broad democratic equality of condition, by which I mean a way of life in which we have more class mixing institutions within civil society. One of the most corrosive tolls of the inequality of recent decades has been our tendency to live separate lives. Those who are affluent and those of modest means rarely encounter one another in the course of the day. We live and work and shop and play in different places. We send our kids to different schools. There are fewer and fewer public places and common spaces that bring people together in chance encounters in the course of our everyday lives. Democracy does not require perfect equality, but what it does require is that people from different walks of life and different social backgrounds encounter one another, bump up against one another in the course of their everyday lives. Whether it's in public parks or sports stadia or public libraries or municipal swimming pools, rather than have the affluent retreat to private health clubs instead. Why does this encounter matter? Because this is how we learn to negotiate and to abide our differences. And this is how we come to care for the common good. It might be thought, and some might challenge me with the suggestion, that by criticizing meritocracy as a kind of tyranny, I'm giving up on individual mobility in the American dream. I went back and looked at the person who coined the term, the American dream, James Truslow Adams. He wrote in the 1930s. He coined the term. And he did consider part of the American dream to be the chance to rise, to work hard, to rise, mobility, rather than a class-based society. But that wasn't all he meant by the American dream. He also meant what I've called a democratic equality of condition. And the example he gave was the US Library of Congress. Here's what he wrote about it. As one looks down on the general reading room, one sees the seats filled with silent readers, old and young, rich and poor, black and white, the executive and the laborer, the general and the private, the noted scholar and the schoolboy, all reading at their own library provided by their own democracy. And he said, this is the perfect working out in a concrete example of the American dream. And if this could be carried out, this example in all departments of our national life, Adams wrote, the American dream would become an abiding reality. We don't have much equality of condition today. The meritocratic conviction that people deserve whatever riches the market bestows on their talents makes community, makes solidarity an almost impossible project. Because why do the successful owe anything to the less advantaged members of society? The answer to this question depends on acknowledging that for all our striving, we are not self-made and self-sufficient. Finding ourselves in a society that prizes our talents is our good fortune, not our due. A lively sense of the role of luck in life, of the contingency of our lot, can inspire a certain humility. It can recall the role of luck in life. This spirit of humility is the civic virtue we need now. It's the humility that enables us to look on those who struggle and say, there, but for the accident of birth or for the grace of God or for the mystery of fate, go I. That could be me. This spirit of humility is the beginning of the way back from the harsh ethic of success that drives us apart. It could be a starting point for a public ethic that points beyond the tyranny of merit toward a less rancorous, more generous public life. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. So I am going to ask a few questions, but I'm not going to cut too much into the audience's time for their questions. So I'll make this a little bit brief after that lecture discussion that gives us so much to think about. Here we are in an ed school, Michael, and you have a strong view, of course, as you just ended this talk, and a strong conviction that nobody gets anywhere alone. In other words, here in the School of Ed, we think about learning and mentorship as almost synonymous, and learning and growth and development is synonymous with mentorship. You talk a little about mentorship and even your own experiences and your own take on yourself as a mentor or mentors that you remember, not unlike your high school English teacher?
Right. Well, the most immediate experience of mentoring, we were talking just earlier about organizing the teaching fellows for the justice course. Part of what that experience has taught me, part of what I've learned from that, is the magic that happens when the more experienced graduate students, teachers, help me teach the teachers, the other graduate students who are perhaps teaching undergraduates for their first time. And so there's a special magic in that, because it's something that helping teachers who are starting out, and I think this is true at whatever level of teaching, depends on having been in the same experience, same setting, facing a group of students, and contending with the challenges that arise in a classroom. Pedagogical challenges, challenges of what do you do with a student who's speaking up and putting up his or her hand all the time and the others may be put off. And the wisdom that's best conveyed in how to do that is based on experience and past, I think, almost not through the generations, but from the more experienced to the less. And here, just now taking a different kind of example of an influence on me as a student, thinking back to high school. I went to a big public high school in a well-off area, but it was a public high school in California. And it was heavily tracked.
Yeah.
So much so that in, I think, the 9th grade math class or the 8th grade math class, before every quiz and test was handed back, the teacher announced the new seating plan because we were seated, at least the first 3 rows, in so-called honors rows in exact order of our grade point average as of that quiz in the math class, which was nerve-wracking to say the least, but also it gave public expression to 8th graders as to who had bombed on the test and who had done well. And I suppose it was an early brush with the tyranny of merit. And so predictably, we became obsessed with grades, not only our own grades, but everybody else's, because that would depend on determine where we sat.
Sorting.
And so there was a teacher, this gets to the mentoring question, who a couple of years later, maybe he was 10th grade biology teacher. I remember his name too, Mr. Farnham. He was a kind of an old timer, and his biology class was filled with wildlife, fascinating wildlife of every description. There were rats and guinea pigs and rabbits and snakes, salamanders, lizards, fish of all kinds. And he had a bow tie. He was a little bit eccentric, a wonderful teacher. And he was bothered by the intensely competitive attitude of the students. So one day, he said, we're going to have a quiz, take out a piece of paper and number 1 to 15 and answer true or false. And the student said, but you haven't handed out the questions. He said, just think of a statement for each one and say if it's true or false. And so immediately everyone asked, will this count? And he said, yes, why not? Now at the time, I thought it was sort of funny. I thought it was an eccentric classroom prank. In retrospect, I see that Mr. Farnham was leaning against the tyranny of merit and the competitive ethos it produced, and wanted us to step back from that long enough to look at the salamanders. And he had a point, and I remember it still, Noni.
And it works perfectly with where your career headed, Michael. Your mentor was the resistor.
Yeah, he was.
Who names the visible problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think that's a good teaching technique? What Mr. Farnham did?
There's a lot to be said about provocative moments and scenarios in classrooms, particularly with adolescents.
Yeah.
Right? As a developmental stage.
Yeah.
One is inclined towards much more engagement under those circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
At that stage. We could talk for a long time about higher ed, and there was so much to love and talk about in your work, particularly as it relates to admissions. And you certainly alluded to that today, and you've proposed before and in your book that, for example, you might make selective college admissions random above a certain threshold, right?
Yeah.
For all the reasons that we just heard about
Right.
this evening. And, you know, as I think about the 6 years since the publication of The Tyranny of Merit, I can't imagine that any of us could have predicted where we might be a mere 6 years later, even.
Yeah.
And were you to write it today, right? Do those kinds of proposals hold, and or where are you with your thinking?
Well, I think beyond the lottery proposal, which enlists chance to chasten merit's hubris, that's the idea, and to remind us of the role of luck in all of this. Beyond that, the broader project I think we need to undertake, and it's hard to do when universities are under attack. It's hard, on the one hand, to do the necessary work of standing up for the autonomy and independence of the academic mission, which is very important and must be done. And at the same time, to acknowledge the ways in which we have strayed from our educational mission and given into these to these other roles, the credentialing, the networking, the sorting. But the broader project that I would like us to embark on and it's beyond what one university can do, but I think
behooves us.
Yeah, well, we could lead in this regard. What we really need is to break down the steep hierarchy of prestige that has come to inform the sorting machine, and to consider that promoting teaching and learning, especially on civic questions, should not be the sole province of the young people who win admission to selective universities. We should think of ways of diffusing access to learning at a high level without assuming that we should sequester, especially moral and civic education, in citadels of learning and then conduct a tournament to decide who gains access to that. So I think we need to promote a broadly diffused democratic public culture of teaching and learning so that a lot of what we present in our classrooms here can be accessible to people everywhere, whether or not they find themselves in a 4-year degree. Now, some of that can be done online.
Yeah.
The internet can be a source, and we did this experiment with the justice class before the advent of MOOCs and edX, really to see if it were possible to use new technology to make higher education a public good, not just a private privilege. That was the experiment.
Right.
And we never imagined that tens of millions of people would want to watch lectures on philosophy. But the idea is that I think the leading, most selective colleges and universities should collectively be asking what we can do to create a broadly diffused democratic culture of learning accessible to everyone.
Yep. Well beyond the notion of a degree.
Yes.
In other words, learning for learning's sake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that front, to marry the two, both the tremendous and in certain ways transformative change, even since 2020 on some dimensions and technological advances, I know you've been thinking a lot about the role of AI and the role of technology in society, and what's promising, what's threatening, where are we, and what might it mean for the sector, and how do we incorporate really good contemplative and clear and interrogative inquiry around technology and its inevitable role in our daily lives and in education. So you are launching a new course, Tech Ethics, and you got some star power to help you with a trailer for the course. So we're going to show that trailer now, and then love to hear a little more about the course and your thinking.
Okay.
All right. star power.
My name is Michael Sandel. This course is about how we can think our way through the ethical dilemmas technology puts before us. To explore these questions, I sat down with actor and director Michael B. Jordan. Why not bring Sidney Poitier back to life to star in a new role?
I would be a fool not to entertain it, but there's something unsettling about it. It's just a feeling of authenticity that's just not there.
And tech-oriented professionals making decisions about new technology every day.
Algorithms in hiring can play a good role. You can train an algorithm to say, hey, I want more candidates from underrepresented racial backgrounds.
Even let's say they are precise in predicting. Sometimes precision means that the past is frozen into the future. All of a sudden, I have introduced a discrimination that I have no idea is in there.
Suppose there were an app that could tell someone who would be the best lifelong partner. What would you trust more, that algorithm or your mom? Whose advice would you trust more?
Let's see that one covered. Bob loved me. For the record, you're always right.
Whose choice would you go with, the app or your mom?
Well, that's fair.
No one can vote against mom.
To me, no, it's just a matter of time, just a data problem.
No, I disagree. No.
Could it be that what really makes us uneasy about social media and algorithms, about chatbots and AI, is that they may lead us to confuse virtual community and connection with the real thing?
I love technology, but old school storytelling and just sitting around a campfire and talking, there's no substitute for that.
Ethical reasoning is a kind of journey.
This is going to sit on me for a while. This is a good one.
The aim of this course has been to invite you on this journey and to see where it might lead you.
Where are we on the course?
Well, this is an online short course, but I'm going to also launch a course next fall in the Gen Ed program here at Harvard on those issues, on the ethics in the age of AI.
And which of those subtopics do you think is going to, has the short course launched and run yet?
It's just about to, or it just has begun.
About the subtopic that's going to be the most.
In the Harvard classroom?
Yeah.
AI matchmaking.
I was wondering.
Dating apps. And how much faith you have in the AI app, or as they're perfected, compared to your friends, your family, your mom.
Yeah.
But there are other interesting issues too, having to do with, the virtual comeback performance in the movies that this part of this clip referred to, and virtual immortality, where people, now there are companies that will let you upload all of your digital trail and enable you to bequeath your digital avatar to whomever you want, friends, family, loved ones, or the public, to carry on conversations with you after you die. What do we think about that? Those are some of the topics that people wrestle with. And
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do one more, and then I'm gonna segue to a few from the audience. But so those are the young adults. Let's just quickly return now to Pali High.
Yeah.
You had an early start on this career. You lured Ronald Reagan to come and speak by, as I understand it, delivering a box of jelly beans to his house with the guards and all.
Right.
But here's what struck me. You and your peers got ready for like a fight, right? And you were ready. It fits developmentally, was passionate at 18, right? Beliefs are becoming both formed, but also entrenched. A lot of heat developmentally.
Yes.
You were hoping, it seemed like, you'd surface some problems, kind of have Reagan squirming or stumbling at least a little bit.
Yes. I was
And,
pretty sure that I could.
and that's not at all what happened.
No. Well,
So it was this early lesson in
Right.
dialogue across difference.
yeah, well, yes, that's true. Almost everyone in this high school was to the left, and we all had long hair, as you could probably see. I did too in that picture. So Ronald Reagan did not have long hair at the time. He was the leader of the conservative wing of the Republican Party. He was governor of California. He was clearly a future candidate for the Republican nomination. And I was a high school debater, and I thought a pretty good one. And then I thought it would be an easy matter to prevail in a debate with Ronald Reagan. And he held views antithetical to ours. He was for the Vietnam War. We were against it. He was against the welfare state and Social Security. We were for it. He was against the United Nations. He was against even what was then up for debate, a constitutional amendment to give 18-year-olds the right to vote. Needless to say, we were for that. So I asked him the toughest questions I could muster. He responded very respectfully and with charm and humor, but he listened. He took us very seriously. And after a half hour, I realized somehow I hadn't laid a glove on him. And then we took questions from the audience. There are 2,400 students. It was a big high school. And the same thing happened. And he listened attentively and respectively and made his case. The hour ended. I thanked him for coming. He thanked us. People applauded. He got up, he left, he went into his limousine, was taken off back. And we weren't really quite sure what had happened because he hadn't persuaded us. We hadn't changed our minds on any of the issues. But somehow he had disarmed us by respecting us and by a certain charm that, well, 9 years later got him elected president of the United States, despite having views to the right of many of the people who voted for him.
And today we don't see quite enough of that.
Well,
in certain ways.
We don't. I mean, in retrospect, public discourse was much more decorous and respectful back then, even though at the time, I and my classmates didn't think it was all that terrific or impressive.
Yeah. All right, we have over 100 questions, so I'm gonna give you a couple, but we're gonna end on time. Number one, first one. A rural school leader serving a high poverty community writes that your idea of contributive justice has shaped how they approach service learning and graduation standards. What would it look like for public education more broadly to take contributive justice seriously? And are there examples that embody this vision at scale?
Well, at scale, the first thing that comes to mind, and this goes also to the class mixing institutions we were discussing, would be a system of national service. Traditionally, military service was a potent class mixing experience. And we no longer have conscription, but having a program of national service, which could include military service, but also other forms of public service, would be a way not only of giving young people opportunities to perform and to contribute to the public good in ways detached from the labor market and the rush to consulting jobs and hedge funds and the like, also a way of creating the encounter across different class backgrounds. And that, I mean, the schools could be venues to help nurture and support that, but ideally that should be a national program.
Right. So you must have, there are so many countries that exhibit these kinds of commitments that we see them not only in their societies, but then they also play out as a function of an education system that does much less sorting.
Yes.
That they tend to run together.
Yes. And we take the sorting and the frenzied competition for admission so for granted that we think this just is what higher education must be.
Right.
But it isn't that way everywhere. It's not that way in Canada.
No.
They have excellent universities and there isn't this frenzied tournament for admissions. In Germany, they have excellent universities. They don't have this frenzied system. We in the US didn't have it until the 1970s, really. It wasn't until the 1960s that, prior to the 1960s, people chose colleges and universities for the most part that were close to where they lived.
Yeah.
They weren't competing to get into the best place in terms of selectivity. And we measure quality perversely by selectivity, which if you think about it means what makes a place really good is that it turns down more people than some other place. Well, what kind of test measure of excellence is that? Except for, country clubs use that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, why should we?
Right.
Why should we?
What's so interesting too, and you have a number of developmentalists and psychologists in this audience, what's very interesting is this has tracked entirely with what is also quite new, which is this optimizing sort of parent mentality.
Yes.
That it is about optimizing, that parenting today is about later, that
Exactly.
every developmental stage is in service of the next one rather than that one.
Exactly.
And so the two tracks have been running and here we are and they collide in the mental health epidemic at young adulthood.
Yeah, 25% of our students, our undergraduates, struggle or on medication or need mental health support and the like.
And yet, humans are rational and adaptive. And so this is your point about conditions.
Right.
That we have set the conditions and that is the product.
Right. And we should step back from adapting too vigorously and strenuously and asking about the sorting that we've created.
Yeah. I'll ask you one more, which is many of today's social conflicts are shaped by identity and competing narratives of belonging and exclusion. And certainly you touched on lots of that. What responsibility do schools and universities have in helping students navigate these tensions? And how can education cultivate this dialogue across difference without deepening polarization?
One thing I think we should do, it's one thing for young people or for any of us to take pride in various aspects of our identities, communities, histories, traditions. That's a good thing. But we should not invite young people to come to a university setting and feel that they are the representative or expected to be the representative of some group to which they belong, because it makes conversation in the classroom stilted and can be deadening, and it imposes tremendous pressure and a burden on people who feel they're there to be representatives of this or that opinion, which is supposed to attach to their identity, rather than to explore, to think, to question, to challenge themselves as well as their classmates in a spirit of genuine inquiry and exploration. This is what we've crowded out, partly by an overly rigid representative use of identity politics, but also by the obsession with networking, competing, and in the case of Harvard College, the comping culture, which is to belong. Here's one thing I would change fast if I were in charge. Harvard has something like 400 undergraduate clubs. And
Nice.
for a very high, there's some of them where you really need special skills, like being on the varsity football team or on the orchestra. In the orchestra, you have to be able to be good at, playing the violin. But a high number of these clubs, of the 400, have so-called comping, where you have to compete to get in, and they boast about the low acceptance rate. Including, for one example, I came across is the Harvard Consulting Club boasts that we only accept 11% of those who apply. Why? Or
Book a bigger room.
right.
Seats.
Or the group, the Crimson Key Society, conducts campus tours for people and they say we only accept 12% of those who apply. Well, why is that? If you're a Harvard undergraduate, chances are you're going to be plenty good with a little training at conducting a campus tour. But it's part of the perverse ethos of this company. So I would say there's a presumption for any student club or association or organization that anyone in the college can gain admission if they want to, except in special cases where you have to make a rationale. I'd get rid of that.
Okay. That's David Deming's job at this point.
I've suggested that to him.
I'm going to end on one more.
We need on a bigger thing than.
We're going to go back to AI
Okay.
and to classrooms and learning systems.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're going to ask you, Michael, who is ultimately accountable when these tools shape student opportunity, and how do we ensure they don't widen opportunity gaps?
I think they will. I think AI will increase inequality, not only within the classroom, but more broadly in the society. Because the people investing in the robots and in the AI mechanisms that are coming for the jobs of a great many people, they are directing the purposes to which these new technologies will be put. And they just assume the purpose is automation, reducing labor costs.
Right.
And that's one possible use, but probably not the best use from the standpoint of the public good. And yet they present it, and we accept it as if the direction of technology is a force fact of nature, and we just have to adapt, back to the idea of just adapting. And it reminds me of the argument made for the market-driven globalization we were discussing earlier, which in the 90s was presented similarly as a fact of nature. It's just the way the world is going, and we just have to figure out how we can be the winners and get the most out of it. Well, what about a public debate about the ends and purposes technology should serve? Should technology be developed in order to replace labor or to enhance labor and increase the productivity of low and medium skilled workers so that their wages could then follow the productivity increases? That's up to us. And the broader point, I guess, running through my argument about the tyranny of merit and about simply accepting the sorting machine role given to higher education, or simply accepting the idea that technology is coming, it has a certain shape, it has a certain purpose, it's going in a certain direction, and we should just adapt to figure out how not to lose out. That way of thinking is a mistake. It's too narrow, it's too small, it concedes too much to a technocratic way of thinking about the public good, and it leaves it all in the hands of Silicon Valley venture capitalists or experts, and deprives democratic citizens of what democratic citizens should be able to do, which is to argue together and reason together and to debate these fundamental questions. What should be the role of money in markets in a good society? What should be the significance of national borders in a global society? What should be the purpose of new technologies, including AI? And maybe underlying those questions, what does it mean to seek the common good, and what do we owe one another as fellow citizens?
We are going to end there. What an evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.